Book 8, The Last Day. Chapter 5, The 34th Day of Planting, A Very Long Day. Part 8 of 12. Young Pear and Nelt continued along the forests on the eastern side of Salem, within view of vineyards and flocks of sheep, but out of view of anyone who still might be around to see them. "How much further?" Nelt asked. "Not really sure," Young Pear said, picking his way through the underbrush. "I know the mountains on the west side, not the east. The forest will lengthen out up here soon, and that's what we're looking for. There's a narrow river that empties off this mountain and heads west toward the valley. The trees that line the river have been left standing. Salemites like the fact that there's a forest running through Salem. Rather cuts the valley in two halves, south and north. But the main road has been cleared, and there are lots of bridges built across it." Nelt shook his head. "Down in the world, the villages clear off all the trees." "I know," Young Pear said in disappointment. "Anything beautiful that nature creates, the world sees fit to knock it down." "So, where's the temple?" "On the other side of that river and forest, in untouched lands. They call them the Quiet Fields." "Huh," Nelt said. "Can't think of anything in the world purposely left untouched and quiet." "Me neither." Young Pear sighed as he walked around a large rock. They climbed up a rise and paused at a clearing. "There," Young Pear gestured. "See how the forest extends out from the mountains like a long finger? It borders the banks of the river and continues nearly all the way to the western mountains." "The army will likely go through that spot." Nelt pointed to a narrow gap in the trees. "That must be the main bridge. So how long till we get to the temple?" "At our rate, about another hour and a half," Young Pear guessed. "Maybe more, since I don't know this terrain." Nelt glanced back to the south of the valley and squinted. "From what I can see, it looks like they're forming ranks." Young Pear focused on the distance as well, where soldiers like swarms of ants were massing. "I think you're right." "How long from there to the temple site on the main road?" "Less than 2 hours, quick march." Nelt and Young Pear looked at each other. "We need to hurry." Shem, Mari, and Clark 14 had been traveling in silence for a while. Eventually Mari voiced the only thought in her head. "Shem, what am I supposed to do there?" "I still don't know." "Thank you for taking me, by the way," she said. "There's no one else I'd want with me right now." He cleared his throat. "Of course, Mari. You're my dearest and oldest friend." She frowned. "You had to say oldest?" He chuckled. "Well, in my eyes, you look exactly as you did when I first met you. You haven't aged a day over 30. "Oh, as if I'm going to believe any of that," she scoffed. "But it was nice to hear, anyway." "It's true, Mari. You're just as feisty and determined and lovely as when I first met you at the market." "You remember that?" "With Jatesy throwing new potatoes and Pato throwing a fit. And you talking to yourself. An unforgettable sight." Mari chuckled. "You really surprised me that day. I'd never met another 20-year-old willing to help me with screaming children. I should have realized then what an unusual man you were. Do you remember you said something about helping me get home?" "I do. And I meant it in more ways than one." "You did, didn't you? I think you started off in the wrong direction, too, pulling Jatesy in the wagon." He smiled. "I started heading east, toward the canal system. I really didn't know which way you lived, but that was the direction I hoped someday to take you. East, then north to our home." "I never put it all together until many years after we came here. I just thought you were a clueless soldier." "I was that, too," he confessed. "I fumbled around so often those first years, I was surprised I didn't give myself away." "No, Shem, you always did the right things," Mari insisted. "You were an amazing young man, and you still are. You never cease to surprise me, Shem Zenas." She could nearly feel him blushing behind her. "And you've always surprised me. No other officer's wife would be asking how to negotiate with garters. And who else would be brave enough to stand in front of Olive Edge years later to declare the administrators were liars? But the most surprising thing you ever did was that night when you stood up to your husband, called him that vulgar name, and told him you'd defend your right to speak even to your death. Phew! I was ready to start applauding, except I thought Perrin might kill me. Mari winced. Oh, that was an awful night, wasn't it? Turned out wonderfully, though, didn't it? He said, watching him slice those administrator emblems off his jacket. It gave me chills. When I put on this jacket today, I wished somehow the name could have been Shin. Instead, I'm stuck with Gerblatz. What kind of a name is Gerblatz? Mari laughed and twisted to look at the badge she hadn't noticed. Oh, I am sorry. Must be the sound overripe fruit makes when it hits the ground. Shem chuckled. Well, at least I'm a colonel. And an excellent one at that. Thank you. They rode in silence again for a few minutes. Talk to me, Shem. It's so quiet, and the voices in my mind are making me nervous. I always suspected you weren't completely alone in there. Exactly. Keep talking. He paused again. I don't know what to say, Mari. I don't either. Here we have all this time with no interruptions and nothing to say. Maybe we don't have to say anything. Maybe after all these years we've said all that we need to say and we can just enjoy each other's silence. Mari pondered that for a moment. That doesn't sound like either one of us, Shem. He chuckled. Oh, Mari, you're just something else. What does that mean? Perrin would say that too. I want a definition for once. I think I deserve that right now, don't you? I really don't know what it means, Mari. We haven't been able to figure out what that something else is. Mari grumbled as Shem chuckled. After a moment, she sighed. You're my dearest friend, too. You've been so much more than just a brother, if that's possible. More than just a friend. I don't even know how to define you. I know that I say Calla is my best friend, but you're my dearest. Thank you, Mari, he whispered. Explain it to her, will you? When you see Calla? She fought to keep her voice steady. We were going to stand together and try to count the soldiers. Tell her I'm sorry. Mari, what are you talking about? But the hesitancy in his voice gave him away. She sighed. You and I both know you'll be riding back alone, Shem. He firmed his grip around her waist as if to not let her go. I don't know anything of the sort, and neither do you. Shem, it's all right. No, it's not. I'm not delivering you to your death, Mari. No, you're not, she said calmly. You're delivering me to my husband. She felt his head rest against hers. No. Please, Shem, let me see Perrin again. I've been so lonely for him. She thought she felt him kiss the back of her head. I'm so sorry. I didn't realize you're so lonely. If only I'd known. I haven't been lonely, not with family all around me and poor Henri doing his best. I'm just lonely for him. Does that make sense? It does, but it doesn't make me feel any better about any of this. I'm feeling sick just thinking about it. Ew, please don't be sick. I'm right in front of you. Shem chuckled sadly. Mari, you don't have to die. I'm not convinced that's what's going to happen. She patted his hand. I'm not afraid, Shem. She paused. All right, honestly, because at a time like this it's best to not have any last-minute mistakes on my mind that I might not have time to fix, I'll admit I am afraid of the pain, but not of dying. I'm fairly confident I know what will happen right after that, and I have a feeling once I get to the other side, I'll wonder why I was so cautious in life that I wanted to prolong it. Paradise will be so much more wonderful than even Salem. She heard sniffing behind her and felt Shem shake silently. She put her arm over his that was wrapped around her and squeezed it. Stop it, Shem. You'll get me going. I need to see clearly in the next few hours. He snorted a laugh that turned into a sob. She was sure she felt him kiss the back of her head that time. Definition of something else, he said quietly. The ability to see the world from angles no one else dared to try. Deciding not to be afraid of what everyone else is afraid of. Not to do what everyone else does. And deciding to be exactly what you want to be without a care in the world as to what anyone else thinks. A little wordy for a definition, Shem, but I'll take it. Give me time and I'll make it more succinct. How much more time do you think we have, Shem? The forest is about 15 minutes away. Right there. She swallowed. I see it. Kind of hard to miss. So, half an hour altogether? At best. Can this Clark go any slower? He tightened his grip on her again. I'll see what I can do. They're still not behind us, Pato, Lila said, turning around to check again. From their vantage point, they could see well down the trail. No one was behind them. They seemed to be the last ones leaving Salem. Everything was still. Silver, bringing up Pato at the rear, continued to plod up the hill. He stared straight ahead, making sure that Zadok and Deck in the lead didn't need anything. Did you hear me, Pato? Lila exclaimed. I don't see them. Pato sighed. I know, Lila. Just keep your eyes on the trail ahead. Gets a little tricky on the steep part. Lila swallowed hard and brushed away her tears. There is our canyon, Young Pear said to Nelt, pointing north. Thorn's going to go to the temple in front of it. We're probably half an hour away. So we go to the canyon? Young Pear turned and slowly drew Nelt's sword from his sheath, as Nelt watched in confusion. He held up to the sunlight admiringly. We go to the temple. May I borrow this? Nelt swallowed. Young Pear, what are you planning to do? I'm going to end this, Nelt, he declared. I'm tired of running from him, of being afraid of him, of being cautious of my every word and step around him. And now he has all of Salem terrified too? How in the world has a man like him been allowed to live this long, but no longer? Nelt shook his head, but took off his belt and sheath and handed them to Young Pear. Just don't tell anyone I gave this to you, all right? Versa plopped down on a large rock by the river and put her feet up on an obliging log. I never realized before how much I depended on thieving to keep me in shape. Tired and hungry, she opened her pack, pulled out some nuts, and nibbled on them. The temple sat to the right of her, precisely cut white stone with pillars and a portico. Majestic, grand, and, like everything else in Salem, very quiet. Exactly what am I supposed to do next? She asked the trees, sheltering her. He'll be coming here, then what? She received no answer. Thorn's troops continued their brisk march north through Salem, through the houses and through the barns, finding a few horses here and there, taking food out of kitchens and cellars, and smashing windows just for fun. For their excellent work in taking out the Salemite fighters, Thorn rewarded them with a sampling of Salem. Their only requirement was to keep up their pace. Guide Lannard led the way, easy to see in his purple silk cloak and light blue pants. The horse he was given trotted serenely north toward a long line of trees, while several officers and guards jogged alongside. Thorn followed about 100 paces behind, also mounted, making sure the soldiers kept up the pace. They did so, with armfuls of food not seen in the world since deceit erupted. Each new house offered an opportunity. A few times soldiers surprised people still hiding in them, but rarely were there any drawn-out confrontations. A couple of slices of a sword usually ended anything before it started. The last of the Salemites, only a dozen by Thorn's count, were fleeing before the army. Most were heading west, but they were much further north than the canyon his prisoners frequently gestured to. Lemuel smiled smugly. They were fleeing to the forests, but they wouldn't stay there long. His soldiers would flush them out, scared and hungry, in the next few days. By the time they'd reached the temple, the army of Idumea would have plowed through the southern half of Salem. Men forgot all about their exhaustion. Those in the back raced to be up to the front so as to be the first to go through another house. It was like a relay race to the forested river. Even the most frail men suddenly found the energy they needed to run 7 miles from the canyon entrance to the northeast temple, looting as they went. Lemuel beamed at the land he was conquering, all before dinner. For the moment, he forgot all about the ridiculous estates, because it was shaping up to be a fantastic day. Snarl gazed longingly at yet another house, open and ready for the taking, but he heard Sergeant Beaved say once again, "No." They were heading north with the rest of the army, keeping up a steady jog, but staying on the main road. Snarl's gaze hardened as he shifted his glare to Beaved. "It's stupid. Everyone else is—" "We are not everyone else," Beaved countered. "We agreed. These are the homes and possessions of people, of Shin's people, and we loot nothing." Reg straightened his jacket. "Snarl, you're free to leave us. Just run off and do whatever. No one's keeping you here." Snarl massaged his hands, which wanted to lift and pocket something. "Still have a duty to do, maybe," he grumbled. Reg and Beaved exchanged looks of bewilderment. "Shin was our duty," Reg reminded them, as their brisk walk came to a stop. The pack of soldiers ahead of them had paused for some reason, which was good because Teach was struggling to catch up. Iron and Hammer had been jogging beside him, poking him unhelpfully when he flagged. Buddy and Pal had already caught up to Reg, Beaved, and Snarl, and watched with expressions of pained amusement as Teach lumbered up to them. Panting exhaustedly, he leaned against a hitching post as the security team waited for the bottleneck ahead to clear. "What are we talking about?" Teach panted. "Please let it be a nap in a house, or here." He slumped to the ground. Beaved eyed Snarl steadily as he said, "We're reminding each other what we pledged in the barn. We loot nothing. We follow the army to see what happens next, and if we find Shin, we help him." Teach asked, "And if we find he's with that cloudy assassin?" Beaved gripped the hilt of his sword. "Then Lieutenant Nelt, and that's his real name, so get used to saying it, Nelt gets what he was intending to give." His team nodded in wary agreement. Just how skilled Nelt was as an assassin still wasn't known. Each man had privately decided that letting Sergeant Beaved approach him first was the best idea. They'd jump in after they assessed Nelt's ability, and if Beaved didn't die too quickly. "Slagging assassin," Snarl grumbled. "I wondered why Thorn assigned him to our team, but I never asked him." Reg chuckled mirthlessly. "As if Cloudy Nelt would have given you a straight answer had you asked." "I meant Thorn," Snarl snarled. "I never asked Thorn." "Well, not like you had private discussions with him." Reg's voice trailed off when he noticed Snarl's curled lip that was attempting a smile. "You did? You spoke with Thorn?" Snarl sniffed importantly. "When he approached me about being on the team, yeah." Beaved folded his arms, his eyebrows furrowed. "Why'd Thorn recruit you anyway?" "Because he caught me climbing the walls to his mansion. Twice." Snarl tried to smile again. "And 3 times I slipped out of incarceration. He needed someone like me, someone who knows the criminal mind, someone who can be creative." Beaved sighed. "Figures. So you think Thorn still wants to use you?" Snarl tipped his head. "If Nelt fails, Thorn gave me permission to finish things off as I see fit." He fondled the handle of his long knife, which stuck out above his waistband. The rest of the team eyed him anxiously. Not like I knew about Nelt specifically, Snarl continued, but Thorn told me he had a few plans in place, and once they failed, I'd get my shot at Shin. I'd also get 50 slips of gold if I take care of things neatly. What, you're supposed to kill him? Beaved demanded. Pal and Buddy shrunk back behind Iron and Hammer, who looked like they smelled something unpleasant. Snarl shrugged. If that's what it took to take care of things. Beaved stepped up to him. Thorn thinks that's his son. I sincerely doubt he wants him dead. So what exactly were you supposed to do? What did you and Thorn decide upon? For once, Snarl seemed unsure, as if finding out for the first time that 2 and 2 don't make 5. Take care of things, he repeated, neatly. No, you're not, Beaved said, his nose nearly touching Snarl's. I'm in command of this team, and my order is that we help Shin live and even escape from Thorn, if necessary. Is that clear? Snarl bobbed his head noncommittally. In a mutter, he said, 50 slips of gold is a lot of gold. He was interrupted by Teach, who was fuming. Slagging General promised me only 20 slips. Now everyone pivoted to stare at Teach, who was struggling to get up from his uncomfortable patch of cobblestone. You too? Beaved explained. Thorn was paying you off too? For what? Information, Teach declared bitterly. There didn't seem to be any reason to hold back now. Details about his family, this valley, whatever I could get out of him. And how much did you get out of him? Beaved pressed. Teach squirmed. Not a whole lot. Not sure if it'll be worth 20 slips of gold. Especially since we're already here, right? Beaved said in exasperation. Buddy and Pal were whispering to each other, and Beaved cleared his throat at them. All right, you two. And how much did Thorn promise you for befriending Shin? They frowned at each other before admitting, only 10 slips of gold. Which is still a lot of gold for 2 boys and only 2 weeks' worth of work, Beaved insisted. Yes, but Shin stank, Buddy reminded them. I know, Beaved said steadily. I was there when they brought him up from the pit for your dinners, and I haven't been promised any extra slips of gold. Me neither, Reg said, disappointed. Offered to be promoted 2 steps above sergeant, but Beaved pivoted to him. Really? I'm only getting my choice of posting. He stopped when the rest of the team snickered at him. So you did all this, Teach waved vaguely, for a bribe from Thorn as well. Then don't look at us with so much self-righteousness. Ignoring that, Beaver turned to Hammer and Iron. And how much did Thorn promise you, and what was your task? 15 slips of gold each, said Iron. For keeping Shin under control, admitted Hammer. We're likely not going to see any of that gold. Don't worry, Beaved said bitterly. None of us would have seen any gold. Thorn didn't bring any with him, and if Shin's correct, there isn't any here either. Noticing a soldier trotting nearby, weighed down with stolen cloaks and coats, Beaved whistled him over. Good pickings, huh? The soldier guffawed. Ugh, anything you could want. How about gold? Beaved asked. At that, the soldier scowled. These Salemites hide it real good. No one's found any gold or silver, not even jewelry. Beaved folded his arms, cast an I told you so look to his team, and said, false walls and cellars, false bottoms and drawers, and mattresses, barns. Trust me, the soldier said, readjusting his pile of cloaks that were sliding in all directions. We're tearing up everything, even slashing paintings, looking for hidden compartments behind. Nothing. They likely buried it all in their fields. Got a few men digging in outhouses looking. Beaved shuddered. Ugh, maybe tell your fellows that they get themselves out of the outhouses, because we've heard that Salemites don't use gold or silver at all. They simply don't have it. Yeah, right, the coat man scoffed, and headed on his way, trying to jog north without tripping. The mass of soldiers began to move again, and Beaved motioned to his team to follow. "So why are you doing this?" Snarl grumbled. "Keeping together, letting those lovely houses go to waste." "You're still free to leave us, Snarl, but we stick together because we're a team," Beaved declared, even though it was a lame reason. He came up with a better one. "Because each of us, in one way or another, is intrigued by what Shin claimed about Salem, and we want to know if all he said was true. And personally, I'm a little worried about all of this last day talk." He glanced behind to see the rest of his team huddled closely as they walked, wearing similarly worried expressions. Except for Snarl, of course. "We need to be on the correct side of all of this," Beaved said. "I don't think that being in the army is the correct side," Reg suggested. "Nor do I," Beaved agreed in a low voice. "But until we can find the correct side, we play the observers. We don't loot, we gather whatever evidence we can, and we don't fight whatever hapless Salemites are at the temple. In fact, if any try to escape, I suggest we do all we can to help them. If there is a creator, I think he'll notice we're trying to do the right thing, even if we're not sure it is the right thing." He hesitated. "Does that make sense?" "In other words," Teach said, "we do the opposite of General Thorne, who didn't bother to bring our reward gold, who hasn't figured out that there's no way Shin could be his son, and who hired an assassin to chase his fake son, who he also likely won't pay. Did that make sense?" Everyone slowly nodded. "So we do the opposite of what Thorne commands," Beaved restated firmly, and the rest of the team met his eyes with new determination. Snarl almost did. Beaved flashed a smile. "Suddenly I'm feeling a whole lot better about this day." "There it is," Shem choked out. "Yep," Mari squeaked back. Shem stopped Clark 14 at the edge of the woods, in front of the ornately carved temple several hundred paces away. Carved out of white stone, it stood 2 levels tall and 80 paces deep. The carved columns at the front were patterned after the columns found at the ancient site. They stood 5 abreast the large front portico of the temple, supporting the roof above them. A wide set of stone stairs, about 20, led from the ground up to the open portico. There were no railings in order to keep the view of the temple clear, since it was the only place in Salem where children were not allowed. Otherwise, it would be impossible to keep the temple as quiet and restful as adults needed it. There was no concern about safety. On the ground around the temple were the cast-off blocks, not used in its construction, the jagged rock reminding Salemites of the boulders that separated them from the rest of the world. The thick glassed windows were draped in heavy red cloth to allow in a little light, but to keep out most of the noise. The temple was a place of serenity, of prayer, of reminders of what the Creator wanted his people to do. And soon it was going to be desecrated by the very world it served to be a sanctuary from. "May it forgive us," Mari whispered. "It served its purpose well for over 150 years. Its time of use is over," Shem whispered back. "We've come here for guidance. We've made vows here with our spouses that we want to be with them in the life we have after, whatever life that may be. It's over." He looked to the side, at the vast fields that always lay before it. The grass was just emerging from the melting snow, revealing a slushy mess. "I suppose there's room for around 70,000 soldiers." Mari scanned the area too. "All the times I came here, I never imagined these wildflower fields covered in blue uniforms. I always thought it was a lovely idea to keep so much of the valley pristine and untouched, just as Pax discovered it. But never did I imagine it was to accommodate the army of Idemia. That was never its purpose. It was supposed to be a reminder of how the Creator designed this valley. The world is just out to destroy it." "I suppose we should go now," Mari said in a shaky voice. Shem cleared his throat. Walk on, Clark. Take your time. Guide Leonard looked nervously at the string of trees before him. We take the bridge, Guide? The major next to him suggested. Yes, of course, the bridge across with no trees. Several soldiers looked at the forest before them. There might not be any volcanoes or mud pots, one of them suggested. A colonel shook his head. Too risky. We know nothing of the terrain. What's the hold-up now? Thorne called impatiently to them, seeing the army had stopped again. Should we funnel the soldiers over this wide bridge, sir? Called the colonel, or risk going through the forest and fording the river, which we do not know if is safe or not? It was obvious which option he preferred. Thorne sighed irritably. Across the bridge! Have them form lines in the wide field beyond. I don't want anyone attacking without our full forces here. We strike as one body and spare no Salemites. Spread the word. Guide Leonard, lead the way. Guide Leonard nodded, glanced to the forest on either side, and kicked the horse into a trot across the wide wooden bridge that spanned the narrow river. He was over and to the other side in just moments, his shoulders sagging in relief. He continued on, with officers and soldiers jogging behind him, to form long lines in the vast fields before them. Clark 14 walked slowly to the temple, carrying his reluctant load, and at the steps he stopped without Shem's prodding. Shem slid off, then took Mari by the waist and helped her down. She started for the stairs, but Shem grabbed her and pulled her into a hug. Mari wrapped her arms around him. You're not making this any easier, Shem. No, I'm not. Gerblatz's jacket caught her tears until she finally pushed him away. Movement in the distance caught her attention. Shem spun to see what had made her gasp. They're here. Far away still, she said. The soldiers were lining up about a quarter of a mile away, the ants trying to organize. He turned back to her. I'll position myself in the forest and... No, you won't. You'll leave here and go straight west. In that uniform, you can ride through them and they'll never question you. Shem grabbed her arms. I'm not leaving you. Yes, you are. No. Perrin will take care of me. Go. Let me go to my husband. Shem trembled at those words. Mari was startled to hear herself say them, but suddenly there was nothing she wanted more. You're still my dearest friend, Shem, she said tenderly, raising her hands to hold his face, still so boyish despite his years. You always will be my dearest friend, and I love you. She kissed him on the lips, a goodbye. Shem caught her again in a massive bear hug. Oh, Mari, I love you too. Tell Perrin. The words caught in his throat until they forced their way out. Tell Perrin I'm sorry. I won't, she said into his chest, since he refused to release her. Because neither of us will be sorry for what you've done. She slid her hands to his chest and gently but firmly shoved him away. Go. I'll sit behind the pillars and watch. You need to get out of here and up to the real site. He showed no signs of budging. Mari, Now, she insisted, and he jumped a little in surprise. Shem Zenas, move it! Before he could seize her again, Mari spun and started quickly up the stairs to the portico. She couldn't bear to see the anguish in Shem's face, nor allow him to discover the immense dread in hers. At the top of the stairs she turned around, intending to lecture him one last time as he stood there, rooted, but instead noticed the soldiers pouring in like water through a broken dam. There was no more time for anything. Instinctively she slipped behind a column, then realized Salem's guide was still standing forlornly staring up at her. Shem, go already, she hissed at him. Tears streaming down his face, he glanced behind him to see the army growing rapidly. He turned back and knew, too, that time had run out. Most dangerous woman in the world, he said. Try to duck, all right? Only if you go. She was now feeling desperate, desperate to get him out of there and to safety. This was no place for the guide of Salem. Reluctantly, Shem mounted Clark 14, and without another word or look, kicked the horse into a run to the edge of the forest. Mari sighed in relief. "Oh, I'm going to miss you, Shem." Versa stood at the edge of the forest behind a tree watching the officer ride past in a hurry. "Guide Zenas?" she whispered, astonished. She turned to see who he had delivered to the temple. Initially, she assumed that the two riders were an officer and a prisoner that the general had sent to check the distance to the temple, but now she was baffled. She couldn't see what was happening with the two people once they dismounted because the black horse was in the way, but now she focused on the person at the temple. It looked like an older woman who ducked again behind a pillar. "What are they doing?" she asked the trees. She stepped back a few feet into the protection of the dense woods and crept along to get a closer view. After a few minutes, she slipped again to the edge of the forest and peered at the figure from a different angle. She recognized the small woman behind the pillars. "Mrs. Shin," she whispered in surprise. "This makes no sense. He just left her there. No protection, no weapons, nothing. He just left her there." Versa was tempted to rush across the slushy field less than 100 paces to the temple and go to Mrs. Shin's aid, but she felt something holding her back. It took her a moment to identify the emotion. Fear. She'd rarely felt fear before, but it filled her completely, trying to keep her stuck to the ground like the prickly shrubs around her. She panted, furious at her cowardice, but even more terrified to actually do something. Instead, she sat down on a felled log and wept. "That's it, isn't it?" Nelt whispered to young Pear. He nodded. "The back of the temple. Look, the army's arriving." In the distance, they could see the lines forming, surprisingly fast. "Guess they want to get this over with and back to raiding kitchens," Nelt mused. "Wait until they find the storehouses," young Pear said. "Thorn will never get them out of there." Nelt smiled slightly and surveyed the canyon below them. "I don't see anyone. No one." Young Pear nodded. "Pretty good, huh? Just like the ford at the glacial valley was nearly impossible to see?" But Nelt shook his head. This isn't the same. We're talking about thousands of people, Shin. The ground doesn't even look disturbed." He was right, and young Pear's thoughts were thrown into a panic before an idea came to him, likely from the head of Salem's security. "Salem is a place of secrets and strategy. Of course, you won't see their footprints going behind the temple. That's because there's a secret entrance." Nelt, who didn't have a clear view of the front of the temple, smiled in appreciation. "Really?" Young Pear waggled his eyebrows. "Really." "Where is it?" he said, gazing at the canyon walls. "Tell me, what do you see?" Nelt continued to look around, shrugging, until his eyes finally rested on the temple. "No, really?" "I told you the temple is a place of refuge, right? All it is an elaborate and secret entrance to the canyon. There are a number of caves throughout the mountain, huge caverns connected by narrow passages. Many open outside the canyon. Some even open in the ground." He held out his hands to the temple. Nelt stepped back in astonishment. "Brilliant! Build an innocent-looking structure over the main entrance to the caves. Do the caves have other exits?" "Wouldn't be any good if they didn't," young Pear invented easily. "They empty out all over the canyon in crevices you can't discern from the mouth of it. Every year they were finding more passages and more exits. They were up to something like 32 before I left. Miles up the canyon." He waved vaguely. "We can hide tens of thousands of people in the mountain, and no one will ever see them. Do you see anything?" "You're right, young Pear," Nelt said, his voice tinged with genuine awe. "That's ingenious. Point out one of those exit crevices to me." "We can't see them from this angle." Young Pear told him. The answer's coming effortlessly. We need to get closer to the valley floor. Thorn will want to search the temple himself, I'm sure. That's when I plan to greet him. Nelt leaned against a large rock. Shin, I don't like the sound of this. Exactly what are you trying to do? Young Pear observed the lines of soldiers growing rapidly. Look, we need to move more quickly. We're running out of time. I'm going to go into the temple and wait just inside the front doors. There's bound to be something I can hide behind. A sofa, shelves, something. You've never been in there? You have to be an adult to know the secrets, Young Pear said. I'd left Salem just as I reached that age, so I never went in there. But I've heard descriptions. It looks like a vast and nicely decorated gathering room. I'll wait in there until Thorn comes in. Then I kill him. Simple as that. Then his guards kill you, Nelt said coldly. But what if they're glad I killed Thorn? Nelt looked dubious. All right, then I run. To where? Nelt gestured wildly. This place will be teeming with soldiers, and a few just might be upset that you killed their general. Young Pear narrowed his eyes. I know where to run to, all right? You just keep to the trees. Obviously, the army is still nervous about the forests, otherwise they wouldn't all be crammed on that one bridge. They'd take the several other footbridges that cross the river. Nelt folded his arms. Shin, I haven't worked this hard just to see you get killed by Thorn. I can do this, Young Pear insisted. I can end it, and I'm not going back to my family until I've done some good. This will be good. This will be suicide, Shin. Does that mean you're not coming? Nelt sighed. I'm right behind you. Lead the way. The sky was the wrong color for such an evening. It should have been the color of a bruise. That stray thought drifted through Mari's preoccupied mind, and she grabbed hold of it, grateful for the diversion. It's blue with a few simple clouds. She frowned at the glimpses of the sky she had from her hiding spot. It's all too cheerful. The color should be deep and angry blue-gray, with swirling clouds suggesting a violent storm approaching, and maybe some jagged lightning in the distance. Menacing, foreboding. Not these fluffy white clouds like clueless lambs floating in the sky. Who ordered such pleasant weather? She demanded, chuckling tensely at herself. Her hands trembled. So did her arms and her knees, and even her teeth chattered for a moment in sheer terror. I'm the brave wife of the major, she whispered to herself, remembering her refrain from years ago when she was running in the dark during a garter attack. I'm the brave wife of the major. After all these years, I still don't believe it. She watched yet another line of soldiers form. Quite a bit of attention and effort for just one little old lady, Lemuel. What a nice gesture. The sun was lowering in the sky. This was when she usually started making dinner with Lilla. Good thing I'm not in the least bit hungry. All of this might have ruined my appetite. I wonder where Shem is. But another thought flitted by, and she grasped on that one instead. I wonder where young Pear is. Where Perrin is. She squeezed her eyes shut. Perrin and she had taken vows together in that temple, with Guide Gleese officiating, promising the Creator to be as faithful as they could, desiring to be together forever. They'd done the same for their parents and ancestors to give them that opportunity as well. Soon she might see if those promises were sure. Please be here, Perrin. Please, please be waiting for me. Thorn watched his soldiers eagerly jogging to the broad fields, many still holding evidence of having raided kitchens along the way. They looked hungrily to the north, where the houses and farms began again, beckoning them to come find out what else might be waiting. Thorn had promised that when the battle was over, they could continue eating and looting to their heart's delight. But first they had a few Salemites to kill. And now that the last of the 70,000 or so soldiers were beyond the bridge, Thorn estimated that the great and swift battle would commence in just minutes. "As if I'm going to ride away and just leave you there," Shem whispered to himself. "Calla, Pato, and Jatesy would all have my head for it, and Perrin would haunt my dreams all night." He and Clark 14 had slipped into the forest between the lines of soldiers. A few men watched him, but thought nothing of the officer on horseback. Almost 100 horses had been found by now. They were probably startled he headed right into the trees, but they could no longer see him. He dismounted, tethered 14, and crept along the trees to have a clear view of the front to the temple. "Thorn captures you? I'll come rescue you, Maury. I still have a few garter tricks up my sleeve, and I'm wearing a colonel's jacket, and I have a sturdy Clark. Rescues in those old stories always happen with big black horses, right? I've got a few plans. Don't worry, Maury." "How much closer do you want to get?" Nelt whispered to young Pear as they crept their way down the mountainside, moving from tree to avoid the more barren and revealing areas of scrubby brush. "I've got to get all the way down, Nelt. I think Thorn's getting ready. The soldiers are lining up. Look, they're starting their approach. Maybe 5 minutes before they reach the temple." His mind searched for an appropriate word to utter in frustration, realizing that his time was running out. But all of those words belonged in the world. "Forget this hiding in the shrubs. I don't care if they see us. I've got to get down there." Young Pear rushed along the slope to be parallel with the front of the temple, needing only to charge down the hill through the forest, race across the field, and rush up the stone steps. He looked behind to see Nelt struggling to catch up. "Wait for me," Nelt said, trying to get through a briar patch in a stand of trees. "Shin, I'm stuck. Help me." Young Pear rolled his eyes and jogged up a few paces. Nelt was caught by a thorny vine that held his leg. "Just let it rip your clothes, Nelt. No one's going to be inspecting our uniforms right now." He bent over to grasp the vine, only to find something wrapping around his thigh, a thick cord. In an instant it was strapped to a tree, and the cord was clasped by the same lock that used to hold young Pear's wrist shackles. Young Pear looked up in alarm. Nelt gave him a sad smile. "Maybe your uniform won't be inspected, but mine will be as soon as I report back to Thorn." Young Pear was so furious he couldn't even speak. Nelt shrugged. "I weighed my prospects of survival again. Being associated with the general's assassin?" He pointed at young Pear. "That's the surest way to die, young Pear. I know." He lifted his sword from young Pear's side. He didn't even remember he was wearing it. "I'm sorry, nothing personal. I actually like you, so I'll be back to get you later, once the caves are flushed. I don't believe either you or Thorn needs to die today." Nelt took off in a run down the mountain to the temple. Young Pear opened his mouth to shout at him, but found he couldn't speak. "Don't give away your position. Sit tight." "But Pugga," he whispered in exasperation, "I can't do anything now." He yanked against the tree that didn't budge. "Exactly. Now sit tight." "I can't sit with my legs strapped to a tree. Did you do this? Is this your fault?" "Yes, young Pear. I convinced a would-be assassin to betray you. Come on, give me more credit than that. We used him, he used us. Way of the world. You should know that by now." "We used him?" "To escape. I wanted you to trust him as far as he would help you. And he helped you get quite far. You never would have made it here without his help. And now he's going to report to Thorn there are caves all over this canyon. Thorn will be more determined than ever. Look, the little stinker named after me is reaching Thorn right now. And there goes the information. I think I can see Thorn salivating from here." Young Pear slumped against the tree. "You did plan this, didn't you? He could be searching this canyon for days." He had to concede that was an excellent strategy. "Security of Salem is my specialty, young Pear, and my calling. I was never released from that. There are still many good people trying to get out. They need at least another day to do it. Unfortunately, searching for caves is not what's going to happen here. You told Nelt that story to get him away. We don't need him anymore. There are a few more things that need to happen first." Young Pear smacked the tree in frustration. "Then let me help." "Oh, you will. You will. But first, 165 years ago, Guide Pack saw exactly what's to take place here. Guide Gleese saw it too. There's nothing you can do, or should do, to stop it. It was prophesied, and it will happen." Young Pear leaned forward earnestly as Thorn, Guide Lantern, and the officers stopped their horses a few paces away from the temple steps. They turned their backs to the temple to watch the rest of the army fill in behind them and spread out, saturating the formerly quiet fields with raucous blue. Young Pear held his breath at the sight. So many, so many. What's going to happen? Something fantastic, Young Pear. Watch, and whatever you do, don't make a sound. And that's the end of part 8. I know, horrible place for me to stop it, but seriously, there's a lot that's coming up, and this chapter would be 2 hours long, and I can't make it 2 hours long. So I'm going to try to record the next one as quickly as possible. So thank you. This is part 8 of 12. Part 9 is coming real quick.